A few days ago, I saw a player worrying about the screws. And honestly, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I have seen this exact panic happen over and over again. Somebody look at their screws, maybe it was like 100k, now it's 80k, 60k, 40k, and suddenly they're acting like the account is about to collapse. They're asking if they should stop leveling heroes, should they save more, should they change priorities, should they start preparing for Hero Academy. And the funny thing is, sometimes nothing is actually wrong. That was surprised me because when I first started paying attention to resource management, I assume a running queue on resources always means something bad was happening. Wow, screws, problem. Wow, food, problem. Wow, gold, problem. Makes sense, right? But then I noticed something weird. The players who worried the most about screws were often nowhere near the stage of the game where screws actually become a problem. And that got me thinking, if screws aren't the problem, then what exactly are people afraid of? That's when I realized most players aren't reacting to scarcity, they're reacting to change. And those are very different things, because when you say you have been sitting on 100k screws for weeks, you get used to see that number. Then suddenly you drop to 70k. Your brain immediately says something is wrong. But is something actually wrong? Maybe, maybe not. Because then I start looking at what those people were actually doing. And one pattern keeps showing up. They weren't running out of screws, they were leveling heroes. A lot of heroes. And that's a completely different situation. A player pushing 5 heroes from level 30 to level 60 burns resources very differently from a player pushing one level 100 hero to 105. The first player suddenly watches screws disappear, the second player barely notice. Yet both players can progress perfectly fine. That's where I think people start making bad decisions. They see a number going down and immediately assume they need to stop. But should they? I don't know. That depends on why the number is going down. And that's a much more interesting question. Because then I notice another trap. Players often prepare for endgame problems long before they actually endgame players. And I have been done this too. You hear experienced players talking about Heroes Academy. You hear people discuss scroll efficiency. You hear people talking about late game bottlenecks. And naturally you think, okay, I should start preparing now. Seems logical. Except sometimes you're preparing for problems that are year away. Meanwhile, today progressions suffer, and that's where things get expensive. Not because the screws are disappearing, because progress is disappearing. I have been seeing players slow down hero development because they're worried about future screw shortage. Meanwhile, their account is missing levels right now, their campaigning is slower right now, their events are weaker right now, their progression is slower right now. All because they're fighting a battle that don't even exist. And that was a huge realization for me. Sometimes saving resources is actually wasting resources, which sound completely backward, but think about it. If a resource help your account grow today, and you refuse to use it because you're worried about the future version of your account, who is actually benefiting? Certainly not the today account. Then things got even more interesting because I started noticing that two players could have exactly the same screw count and be in completely different situation. And right now we're talking about the screws, but I want to point out something that is not all about spending everything right now. Sometimes spending everything right now is removing your account flexibility in the future. This video is around the topic where we're actually talking about these screws. So, because I start noticing that two players could have basically exact the same screw count, but completely different situation. One player is healthy, the other player is in trouble. Same resource count, different reality. How is that possible? Food. And honestly, I think food confuses players more than the screws. Because eventually some accounts stop being screw limited. They become food limited. And as you can see here, you can even see from where you can get some screws. You can go at this place and go for the screws. For example, winning this Castle of Castilla 5, I'm going to get from 380, and I'm going to just do one auto victory, and I'll get like 1,350. In the same time, to level up, or maybe I'm going to put this hero, to level up Maria Curie, I basically need like 2k, which is, close to the amount I get. But 280k food, that's crazy amount of food compared to that screws that with 2 wins I can have my Maria, or maybe 3 wins I can have Maria Curie level it up. But yeah, they become food limited. I've started starving, and at that point screws aren't the bottleneck anymore. Food is. And if food is bottleneck, why are you panicking about the screws? That's where I think people accidentally optimize the wrong resource. They focus on what's decreasing, not what's limiting the progression. And those are always aren't always the same thing. In fact, they are often different. Then I start paying attention to the strongest accounts. And something surprised me. They didn't cease obsessed with protecting resources. They seem obsessed with using resources correctly. That's a completely different mindset. One mindset asks, how do I avoid spending? The other one asks, what give the best in return? And I think that one of the biggest progression shifts player eventually make. And I think that's one of the biggest progression shifts eventually the players are making, because early on resources feels precious. Every school matter, every upgrade matter, every decision feels scary. But later you realize the goal was never to finish the game with most resources. The goal was to turn the resources into accounts range. And that's not always the same thing. Then I notice another contradiction. Players panic when screws drop, but they don't panic when when they're progressing slow. They're panicking when the screws drop. Even though progress slowing is usually the biggest problem, think about that. If your screw count drop by 20k because you massively improve your roster, is that a bad? Probably not. If your screw count stays high but your account barely improve for like 2 months, is this good? Probably not. Yet many players emotionally react to the first situation and completely ignore the second one. That's where I think the screw panic trap really comes from. Players measure the wrong thing. They watch resources instead of watching account growth, and those aren't always aligned. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. The trick is knowing the difference. And honestly, that's something I'm still learning myself, because every time I think I've figured out progression, the game finds a new way to make me rethink it. But if there is one thing this discussion changed for me, it is decreasing resource isn't automatically a problem. A stable account usually is. and those two things are easy to confuse. So now I'm curious, have you ever stopped upgrading heroes because you weren't scared of running out of screws or other resources? And looking back, do you think that's actually help your account or just delay progress you should have taken sooner? So yeah, I just want to give my 2 cents over the resources here. I'm talking about the experience points. I mean these screws, but in general, it's applying almost to all of the resources. Obviously, I don't spend all. As you can see, I have like 3 million food and I have like 2.6 screws. But for me, screws is very easy to be get it. Right now, I'm going to even do that, and oh my god, it's getting even bad. But anyway, it's not that hard to get those resources. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit one like, subscribe for more Heroes of History Epic Empire content. If you want to directly support my channel, you can become a member and get early access to my videos. I wish you a great day and see you in the next video.